Hello everyone and welcome to Uncharted Parenting, a podcast brought to you by Encounter Youth. Parenting is one wild adventure. It's full of twists, turns and plenty of uncharted territory. Don't worry, we're not navigating it alone, we're here with you. Each episode here on the pod, we dive into real conversations, expert insights from some amazing professionals from various fields, and honest stories to help you find your way in this parenting journey. I'm your host, Louis, the Education and Parent Coordinator at Encounter Youth. Before joining the team here, I enjoyed 9 years serving as a police officer in the South Australian Police. But most importantly, I'm the proud dad of 2 boys. Welcome to Uncharted Parenting because, let's be honest, no one really has a map for this journey. Let's dive in. All right, so welcome to another episode of Uncharted Parenting. We really appreciate having some special guests and especially having guests in person. So we're very blessed today to have with us Jana Gomes. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for coming in. And look, we really appreciate your time. And you do some incredibly important work around consent education, respectful relationships, also prevention of sexual violence and things like that, which we'll sort of explore a little bit today. But first, for those who may not know you or have heard about who you are and what you do before, can you maybe just share a little bit about your journey and sort of and what your day-to-day sort of work looks like, Jana?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a relationships and sexuality educator, and I guess the work that I do is about empowering young people and young adults with the tools they need to build relationships that are respectful, that are ethical and grounded in mutual care. I work across different types of settings, from high schools to professional sporting clubs, and every day, I guess, looks very, very different to the day before. From one day I could be running a workshop on consent with some year 10s, and the next day I could be working with the Sydney Swans, exploring, I guess, how status and power can shape intimate relationships. But at its core, the work is always about supporting people to better understand themselves, to better understand each other, and to, what kind of relational culture that they want to be a part of as well.
Yeah, some pretty important work. And you and I were just chatting before we start the pod and about, you also got 2 boys.
Yeah, I do.
And also working 2 jobs. So yeah, it's pretty incredibly busy for you at the moment.
Yeah, very busy, very busy.
I'm sure the 2 boys keep you on your toes as well.
Oh, they certainly do. I've got a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old who at the moment fight about everything and anything.
Yep. Yeah. Well, as a dad to 2 boys myself, I was really excited about doing this interview with you just because, there's lots of perceived gender imbalances in our society as a whole, really. And, have it as a dad to 2 boys myself, like I really want for my boys to be brought up in this world where, stuff that you're teaching is really at the core of curriculum and that they're learning in every day in their schooling. So it's an incredibly important work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I'd love to start by unpacking your approach to different things. So you just mentioned a second ago, there's vastly different audiences. Yeah. So from year 10s at a school, 11s, 12s, or whatever it might be. And then, you've also worked in a space with, AFL teams, NRL teams. I think as well, did you do a NFL in America? Did you go to?
No. NRL, AFL, I've done soccer, and I've even done a workshop with a team of jockeys here in SA. So, yeah.
Incredibly vast and different organisations and audiences. So, look, I know you've done incredibly amazing work in those sorts of environments, but how does it differ? So how do you present to a group of year 10s compared to how you present to an AFL team, for example? I can imagine it's very, very different.
It is very different. The heart of the message stays the same, though, that consent is not just about permission. It's about mutual care. It's about respect, and it's about being accountable as well. With young people, I tend to focus on language and building frameworks, how to identify coercion, how to describe consent, how to identify those red flags and those green flags. There's a lot of myth busting as well with the students, trying to support them to unlearn things that they may have picked up online through social media. And with professional athletes, it goes a little bit deeper into how power works, especially status and influence and entitlement. And those kind of workshops push for more critical reflection How might someone's yes be shaped by their position or their reputation? Or, what are the unspoken dynamics that you're not seeing? And so it's less about what is consent and what is coercion and what are the green flags and red flags, and it's more about what kind of person are you choosing to be, I guess is the big difference there. But I tell you what, it's more daunting presenting to a group of year 10s, perhaps.
Well, sometimes, I find obviously, being in the alcohol and other drug space, going into school sometimes, they're brutally honest.
Oh, yeah.
Teenagers.
They really are.
They tell you what they're thinking and ask the hard questions.
Yeah.
Also the more adult audiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Just quickly before we move on, you mentioned a word in there about coercion. That's a word I've heard a lot recently. Can you maybe take us through what that actually means?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Probably maybe a bit of misconception about what that actually does mean.
Absolutely. So if we're looking at coercive control, it describes a pattern of behaviour, and that pattern of behaviour has the aim of taking control away from somebody else.
Yeah.
So using someone's power over another person to remove their autonomy. So it's not just this once-off incident. It's not someone just being mean. Coercion and coercive control can pop up in all types of relationships. And so it's not just this one standalone incident. It's this ongoing pattern of subtle behaviours with the aim of removing that control from the other person. And we're seeing a lot of it happen for young people. There was some research that came out late last year. The Attorney General's Department released some brilliant resources online. And it found it was about 1 in 4 adolescents had experienced coercive control. But simultaneously, almost half of them couldn't describe coercive control, which isn't surprising because there isn't one standalone agreed upon legal definition, because it does refer to that pattern, and I guess it looks different for everyone. It could be someone controlling what someone wears or controlling who they hang out with. Or it could be, it could manifest differently in, a marriage perhaps. You could be controlling finances, so it can look very different depending on the relationship.
Yeah. 1 in 4, though, that's a big number.
Yeah.
Young people.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I'd be interested to look into that study, actually. So your delivery, Jana, obviously shifts depending on your audience.
Yeah.
But the message remains consistent, as you've said. Look, let's sort of bring it back. Sort of bring it back into the home now. So, in mind about our parents that we're trying to reach as part of this podcast, these topics like sex, like consent, respectful relationships, they're those taboo topics or those ones that parents find really hard to approach their adolescents, teenagers, young people about. How do you think, or do you have any suggestions on how parents can approach these conversations really well? And have you navigated them probably yourself actually with your own boys a little bit? Probably not in depth with their ages, but maybe a little bit.
Every time I try and bring it up with my kids, they just roll their eyes. They're like, here mum goes again.
Mum's in work mode. Yeah.
Or I'll sneakily leave like a book on someone's pillow about puberty, and I'm like, did you read the book? Yes, Mum. I think the key is to start early and to keep it ongoing. I think we need to move away from thinking it as the talk and it being this one standalone conversation that we dread ever since we've found out that we're going to be parents.
Yep.
And instead, it's about creating that home culture where questions are welcome and feelings and boundaries and respect for relationships are everyday topics. So with my own boys, I bring honesty, curiosity, and a lot of humour.
That's it's always key, isn't it? Yeah.
And I'll name things as they happen, whether it is a stereotype in a movie that we're watching together or something that we overhear when we're out and about. Like I'll use that as an opportunity to ask questions or as a conversation starter. And I might not always have the perfect answers, but I try and model being open and reflective and willing to grow. I want them to grow into beings that safe people in relationships, however that relationship might look, whether that is an intimate relationship or a friendship or a relationship you have with your work colleagues. I want them to be that safe person. And so I think it's important for them to know that it takes practice, but it's okay to keep learning.
Yeah. I'd be interested at how's that been received by them so far.
Just a lot of eye rolls.
Yeah. Because I think no matter sort of what you do as a parent to I'm thinking about, when I was a teenager, and like my parents, to be fair, they were quite open in regards to the puberty stuff and all that. And again, they did the startle with the books and everything, like you were saying that you were doing. But yeah, it sort of opens the floor to them, doesn't it? To if they have those questions to you, and even something you said then about taking those everyday experiences and those opportunities to just have those one-on-one conversations. It doesn't just need to be the talk, so to speak. Because that was the old approach, so to speak.
It was.
Thanks for that, Jana. It does feel like parents are getting better at having these tricky conversations, and probably whether that's about sex, consent, alcohol, or other drugs. But something I'd really love to sort of try and zero in on today is this intersection of alcohol and sexual relationships, especially as perhaps teenagers get a little bit older and talking, and they're sort of experimenting in that party scene and that culture. And at Encounter Youth, we sort of touch on this a little bit in our Year 11 sessions with young people, but we don't go in depth with it. So I'd love it if you could maybe take us a little bit deeper into that, and also how does actually alcohol affect this issue of consent that comes up? We see this on a vast scale in the media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get questions about, it's the most common question I get when I'm doing presentations around consent is how does alcohol impact it?
Yep.
And it can really complicate consent because it affects our judgment, it affects our communication, our ability to read each other accurately. When alcohol is involved, we're more likely to engage in riskier behaviours. We're more likely to overestimate somebody else's interest in us. We're more likely to miss those subtle cues that someone isn't consenting or they're not having a really great time. We're also more likely to rely too heavily on assumptions or implied consent, There was this survey that I came across a couple of years ago and it's really stuck with me. It was a US-based survey, but it was with college-age students, and it found that 75% of the male participants of this survey agreed that someone accepting a drink was a sign of sexual consent. And that's wild to me. The same percentage, about 3/4 of the female respondents said absolutely not. It might be a sign of sexual interest, but it's certainly not a sign of sexual consent.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly concerning. And I guess it shows how easily consent can, distort the way people interpret situations, especially in a culture where direct communication about sex and consent is still taboo. It isn't always modelled for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned about the difference between males and females in that.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that, Jana? Like, is there a reason that males perhaps, as a male, like perhaps misinterpret cues differently to the way that perhaps, females interpret them? Or is there some studies around that?
There probably does. There probably are studies that do exist, but when the alcohol is involved, it's equally. We're both more likely.
Yeah.
All of us, regardless of our gender, are more likely to misinterpret cues. We're more likely to, misinterpret flirting.
Yeah.
As someone's just being friendly, and we're thinking that is flirting.
Yeah.
I think it's equal when it's alcohol involved, but I'm sure there are definitely studies out there which unpack that a bit more.
It's interesting that you say that, just because it sort of leads me into my next question for you is just, so in a recent episode, we spoke with Acting Commissioner for Children and Young People in Mimi Crow, and we looked into the Teenagers and Safety Report that was done in 2024, October 2024, by the previous commissioner to Mimi. But there was a quote there from a 17-year-old student, and I'm just going to, it really stuck with me, so I'm going to read it. Now, she said she felt like the girls in this scenario ended up educating the boys during a school consent session, and that some of the boys genuinely didn't know what was clearly right or wrong. And she felt off the back of that, this confusion, in carrying over into unsafe relationships later on. So with that in mind, from your experience, and we've just really briefly just discussed this a second ago, is there a particular gap in understanding that you have found as you've been going about your school talks in sessions?
What I see across the board is that young people, regardless of gender, are asking for more honest and nuanced conversations around consent. Yeah. They're craving for space to talk about those grey areas, how alcohol impacts somebody's ability to consent, how power and pressure might show up, what does coercion look like, how to navigate that uncertainty, how to accept a no from somebody, how to respect somebody else's boundaries while holding on to our own. And so... Well, simultaneously, alongside of that, we also need to recognise that many young people, boys in particular, they haven't had the opportunity for that same access to relational education. They're not always given the tools to be able to reflect on emotions and name vulnerability, or to recognise how power might impact consent, perhaps. And I guess that does create a gap, and addressing that gap is crucial, not only for violence prevention, but to support all young people in building safer, more accountable relationships.
You do a lot of work in sexual sexual violence and sexual assault prevention and things like that. Can you maybe take us a little bit into that space, just very briefly? I know I'm sort of it's not leading into my next question, but I'd sort of like to touch on that a little bit. Is that a space that's quite, obviously through your work with the Legal Services Commission, you probably see a lot of that. Is that a space that, these sorts of incidents are increasing, or is it you finding it like it's sort of the same as it was when you first started in this space? Or
there's a lot of research that looks at like the Australian statistics broadly, and if we look at the numbers purely, we can see an increase. But a lot of that may be because people feel more comfortable reporting these things now. It might be that there is better pathways to report. I think it was in New South Wales, they have an anonymous reporting system that you can just jump online and report things through. So again, it might be increasing. And if we look at the numbers purely, yes, that it's true. It is increasing. There are more incidents. But it might also be that people have the language now to talk about what they have experienced. If we look at the statistics for young people in particular, the La Trobe University survey that they do every couple of years, the most current survey statistics that are out, and the new one's coming out at the end of this year, and I can't wait. But the most current one that's out, it says that of year 9 to 12 students who report being sexually active, it's 39.5% who have reported at least one incident of unwanted sexual activity. And the survey before that was 28%. So a big increase. So like I said, if we look at the numbers, it is increasing. But what is the reason for that? We're just not sure.
Yeah. And we could probably deep dive into that specifically in a whole other episode just in itself. So I definitely won't do that to you today. But sort of building on that, is there some strategies that parents can equip their kids with to help them avoid situations where their vulnerability might be taken advantage of? Or, what is practical and realistic in terms of preparing a young person for the real world that they're moving through and sort of as they're navigating that?
If you have the answers, tell me.
Yes.
I think one of the most powerful things we can do as parents is raise kids who believe in themselves. That means teaching them how to recognize their own boundaries and to notice when something feels off. But to also have the confidence to speak up on that. For us parents, that looks like validating their emotions, even when it's not the most convenient thing for us to do in the middle of a shopping centre. But giving them or allowing them to practice saying no and speaking up and asking for help. I also think we need to talk really honestly about risk rather than, saying, don't do this, don't go out, don't drink alcohol, all these bad things are going to happen. We need to take that harm reduction approach and be like, okay, if you're choosing to go out, if you're choosing to drink alcohol, what is your safety plan? Does someone have your back? And how do you know that that person perhaps has your back? How can you make sure you are as safe as possible if this is what you're choosing? So I think we need to be really honest about those conversations, because as much as we want to wrap them up in cotton wool and keep them safe, we have to let them out there into the world, and they need to learn these skills for themselves. Yeah,
it's not realistic, is it, to just wrap them in bubble wrap or cotton wool and just...
It'd be nice though.
It would be nice, but you're 100% right. And that's really, I'm really happy to hear you say about that harm reduction. You mentioned just a second ago, that's something we really pride ourselves on here, is our harm minimisation or harm reduction approach. because the reality is that young people at some point, they are going to choose to use alcohol or maybe other drugs, and they are going to enter into spaces where relationships are there, and where they're going to have to say yes or no or consent in some way or shape or form. So whatever that relationship might be. So that's really important. That's really great to hear you take that approach in your education. So, Jana, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this space, because it's a space that we really haven't been able to touch on a lot on the podcast as of yet. So I really thank you for your insight into it. I've got one final question for you though, and it's something that I've been asking all the guests that sort of come on the podcast that are parents. So parenting can be a bit of a mixed bag, kind of. I certainly find that in my own parenting journey with young kids, full of wins, maybe some challenges as well. Is there one thing that you've found particularly tough in your parenting journeys thus far, or maybe something you're still figuring out? And what would you perhaps say to parents that are maybe navigating the same thing that you might have struggled with, and some strategies that you were able to put into place?
Well, it's a tough one. I guess what I'm still trying to figure out is exactly what I just mentioned, how to keep them safe while allowing them autonomy and to grow and be their own person, especially in a world where it feels like there is so much to protect them from. I think that is my biggest struggle. But I guess what I'd say to other parents is that you don't always have to get it right. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to stay open. You need to kind of keep showing up and let your kids know that you are that soft place to land if they need it. They can ask you questions. They don't have to tell you everything, but you are that person that they can talk to. And that, I think, means more than just saying all the right things all the time.
Yeah, so true. I certainly don't get everything right, that's for sure. So actually, before we go, is there perhaps some support services, Jana, that I know you probably come into contact with a lot of them, that you would perhaps recommend to parents to encourage their young person to go to should they need to? And maybe also, could you just give us a bit of an insight? I know you've got your own website as well, so maybe just talk a bit about that one as well.
Yeah. In terms of support services, I think we can't more, ignore the Kids Helpline. That is brilliant. And often when I'm talking to students and I'll have the Kids Helpline details on the screen, someone might say, oh, we're not kids, we're 15 or we're 16. And I say, well, this is until you're 25. You can utilise this service. It's wonderful. So Kids Helpline is brilliant. Shine SA have recently released a support service called With Respect, which is a free and confidential counselling service for LGBTQIA plus youth who may have experienced family, domestic or sexual violence. So I think that one is a brilliant resource. And of course, 1-800-RESPECT. Another question I get all the time by students is someone will approach me afterwards and say, hey, my friend has just told me that she's experienced or they have experienced sexual violence. What's the best way to support that person? And my answer is 1-800-RESPECT. We can utilise that service as a debrief, but we can call them and get support and advice. And I say that to the students. So 1-800-RESPECT is a brilliant resource for us, but also to use if we have someone close to us that we want to support, and how to do that in the best way possible. So I have a website. It's Jana-Gomes.com. And people can contact me through the website. I, as you know, am juggling a million different things. So my website is kind of just bare basics for now. But if anyone, needed more information about what services I offer in terms of workshops around consent and coercion and healthy relationships, then they can contact me and we can work through that.
I know you've done some events with other people working in this space as well. I think notably the one that you did at Pembroke recently. That was a great one. And with Chanel Fontos. That's doing a lot of work in this space as well. But if you are an educator listening to this, then get Jana into your school because she is doing some amazing work in this space. And it is a conversation that needs to be had with young people, and even with adults as well in the sectors that you're already doing it in. So, Jana, I just want to thank you very much for your time today. I know you're, like we've discussed, you're a very busy woman, juggling 2 jobs, 2 kids as well. So thank you very much for your insight today. And I'd love to sort of pick your brain more about this sort of stuff as well. So perhaps we can I'd love to sort of have you on again in the future. So
absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'd love to be back.
Thanks, Jana. Thank you. Well, that's it for today's episode of Uncharted Parenting. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. We love to hear from all of our listeners, so if you have any questions that you would like us to answer here on the podcast, we want to hear from you. Send those questions in to us and we will be answering them right here on the pod. Please send them in to podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. That's podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. Uncharted Parenting is now also on YouTube, so head on over and subscribe to our channel at Encounter Youth AU. And remember, wherever you listen to your podcasts, give us a follow, subscribe, send us a review, send in those questions by the bucket load, and remember, there's no map for parenting. You enter uncharted waters every single day, but there is a way forward. You're doing an amazing job, and we're here with you on that journey. We have some more amazing episodes and guests coming your way soon. Until next time, goodbye for now.